Kashinathumi Nageswara, who founded the Andhra Patrika paper, a Telugu newspaper. But the story behind this newspaper and the story behind the man is multifaceted and very interesting. Nageswara Rao was born in 1867, May 1st, 1867. The date is very interesting because he is 2 years older to Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was born in 1869, and 1 year younger to Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who was born in 1866. Nageswara Rao was born in a rural countryside in the Krishna district, which was then part of the Madras presidency. Just to give a slight background of the Madras presidency, the Madras presidency had three major areas: the Telugu speaking districts, the Malayalam speaking districts of Palghat, and the Tamil speaking districts, which now form part of Tamil Nadu. In the 1950s, all these three areas became separate and became part of the linguistic state units. Nageswara Rao was born in this village in Krishna district, and then we do not know much about his family background except the names of his parents. And we are told that he moved to a nearby town called Machilipatnam, which is a port area, which was a port area during the Quli Qutub Shahi times, and also during the Nizam period in the early 19th century and 18th centuries, where by that time the British had set up schools and colleges in many of these towns along the coast and in all the presidency areas. So Kashinatham Nageswara had his earliest schooling in Machilipatnam, and from there he moved to Madras, which is now Chennai, and joined the Madras Christian College, and he graduated from there. It is very interesting that he moves from a village to a town and then comes to the capital of the presidency and attends one of the most prestigious colleges in Madras, the Madras Christian College. Remember, later on, Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan also went to Madras Christian College and passed out from there with his MA Philosophy. But the path followed by Nageswara Rao was quite different and very interesting. In Madras, he teams up with a man who was writing guides for the students, and he has earned a lot of money. But he also had a medical shop where they were making medicines. So after apprenticing himself with this man, he had differences. He married his daughter, this man's daughter, but then he moves off to Calcutta, which was then the capital of British India. In Calcutta, he joins some of these drug companies. Interestingly, a very antique word is used, apothecary, where they make drugs, indigenous, and also the new drugs of the allopathic medicine. He spends some years in Calcutta, and then he moves to Bombay, another major capital of the presidency, the Bombay presidency. So, very early in his life, he moves from a village to a town, and then moves to all the three presidency areas in the short span of about 20 years of his life. When he moves to Bombay, sometime in 1880s, late 1880s, he is barely 20 years old. He was born in 1867, as we have noticed, and then joins a company owned by an Englishman called Williams. It's a drug making company. He works with him and he rises in the hierarchy, in the corporate hierarchy. So when Williams leaves India and gets back to England, he allows Nageswara Rao to buy the company. So at a very young age, Nageswara Rao becomes the owner of a drug company. Now, this is the kind of story which we rarely come across, either in modern times or in the olden times. It's almost like the story of a self-made millionaire. Of course, The millionaire the story comes in the next step of the story. Once he takes over this drug company, he hits upon concoction called Amrutanjanam, which is now a household name uh, in many parts of the country. It has sort of receded into the background in the last 20-25 years, but for a very long period, the Amrutanjanam was a part of the first aid kit in every home in the country. It was a balm for headaches and for body aches. And he hits upon the idea of Amrutanjanam in 1893 and begins to sell it. And he was just 26 years old. Very soon, Amrutanjanam becomes a commercial success and he becomes, yes, a millionaire. A millionaire in 1890s before the turn of the 20th century. This is the most interesting part of Nageswara's story because he doesn't come from a business background. He is not from a rich family, but he seems to make a journey all on his own from Krishna district to Madras to Calcutta to Bombay, and then he establishes himself as a major businessman, and his product is Amrutanjanam, and he makes money out of that. And there are lots of stories about how he sold the Amrutanjanam. Apparently, he used to distribute it freely at the music concerts in Bombay. It was after making money in Bombay through his Amrutanjanam that he gets interested in the political life. We are told that he attended the 1907 Congress session at Surat. The 1907 Surat session of Congress is rather important because there was a split in the Congress. The first time the Congress party split between the moderates led by Gopal Krishna Gokhale and the extremists led by Tilak and Sri Aurobindo and others. So after attending the Congress session in Surat, he comes back, and in 1908, he hits upon the idea of starting a newspaper. Starting a newspaper, he has two reasons. One, he feels that advertising for Amrutanjanam in other papers is costing him a lot. He would rather spend that money in starting a product of his own. So he starts Andhra Patrika in Telugu in Bombay. That is the most interesting aspect. That there is a large Telugu community in Bombay upon whom he depends to sell his paper and to sell his product. So 1908, he launches Andhra Patrika as a weekly. And it shows, this is the most interesting part of Nageswara's story, that he seems to move around British India, and British India is almost well developed socially, that people from every part of the country are settling in these presidency towns, which is a common feature. In Madras, a lot of Telugus are settled, and it's almost like a Telugu majority area. And it's a surprise. It came as a surprise to me that at that time in 1890s and the early 20th century, there was a significant chunk of Telugu population in Bombay, and Nageswara was able to start a newspaper to meet their needs. What does he do with this Telugu newspaper? This Telugu newspaper, I just want to show a visual of this Andhra Patrika thing of 1911. Let me see if I can get back and show. Yeah, 1 minute. This is the first. This is the 1911 edition of Andhra Patrika, which started as a weekly. I'll just show you the page 1 of. This is the page 1, and this is the issue of the Telugu New Year Day. It was April 12th, 1911. And you can see what is written there in English. So what happens is that he starts this paper, and we find that this annual session, annual issue contains about 320 pages. He must have gathered enough ads, and the second page shows the ad for Amrutanjanam ad, and here is a woman carrying a child, and it says it for It is for headache and all for all kinds of body aches. Then the same ad is carried at the end of the annual issue, where this is the 318th page, where he carries again an ad for Amrutanjanam. In between, he carries a lot of articles. The interesting thing about this issue is that these articles are of various kinds. One, in his editorial, which he calls a preface, in Telugu it is called Patrika, he explains 1911, what were the major events that were happening. 1911, Edward VII died and George V became the king. And he says India is improving a lot of people are happy and the population has increased and there's a lot of success all around. And he also observes, you can see that his political leanings were that of a moderate. He says the violence and people who are resorting to terrorism have gone back, have receded, and we can deal with the government. And Lord Minto has given up his office, and Lord Hardinge has become the Governor General. And he hopes that Hardinge will be able to carry on more reforms. So that is the tone and tenor of Andhra Patrika Weekly in the 1911 issue. But throughout, the articles are of varied interest, in the sense, one of the major things happening at that time in the cultural life of the Telugus was the fight between scholars and the reformers about freedom of women, education for women, and more importantly, at the literary level, they were having a fierce battle about what is the kind of language that people should use in modern times. Nageswara was also for using day-to-day language and not too much of literary language. And the words they used was, the fight was between Grandhika Bhasha, that is too literary bookish language, and the Gramya Bhasha, that is the language that was in everyday use. Of course, he did not go completely over to the day-to-day use, but somewhere he was trying to strike a balance. But he carried very intense debates through the articles in this paper about the literary flavor and the challenges before modern Telugu as to what is to be done. He notes the fact that there are not many prose works in Telugu, that classical Telugu had only poetic works, and that even when they used prose in between poetry, that many of them used it only for stylistic purposes, but not with the intention of conveying information and connecting the readers to the modern knowledge that is happening. The third thing he notices is that there are no scientific articles in Telugu, no technical essays about technical aspects in Telugu. So he tries to address and remedy that aspect in the paper. So you can see that apart from becoming a very rich man on his own, he turns to politics, but his interest in politics is not confined to a very narrow thing of a political agenda. He becomes part of a Telugu Renaissance, and he takes part in the literary debates and the cultural debates. Because along with the political struggle, we see that a cultural struggle was unfolding within every language community. This cultural struggle has happened in Marathi. It has happened in Bengal in the early part of 19th century. So in Telugu, also influenced by the developments in Bengal of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Raja Ram Mohan Roy and others, a man called Kandupuri Vereshalingam, he started this reform movement of stopping the child marriages, supporting widow remarriage, and also pleading for education of women. And Kashinathu Nageswara hitched his star to the bandwagon of social reform and cultural renaissance. So this is a very, very wide agenda for a man who went into politics and who took interest, because he realized that unless Indians connect with the world, wake up to the 20th century world, to the modern world, they won't be able to achieve much. Secondly, he realized that to do this, we have to do it in our own languages. That we have to do science in Telugu, we have to do prose in Telugu, and we also have to settle many of the cultural challenges and debates. So this is the agenda, more or less the agenda of Andhra Patrika, which we see in these issues. 1914, he shifts from Bombay to Madras, because somewhere he seems to have realized that the limitation of the number of people speaking Telugu in Bombay and his circulation cannot grow much. So 1914 he comes to Madras, but then he turns the weekly into a daily newspaper. And that is a very interesting aspect of it, that this becomes the first Telugu newspaper. He has earned enough money, he moves to Madras and buys a good house, starts the paper and makes it into a daily newspaper. Let me see if I can show you the, okay, this is the picture of the man. The only picture we have, which must have been taken when he was quite old. He died in 1938. So this must have been sometime in his middle age. And this is the standard picture of, we know of the man, with his spectacles, with his Gandhi cap. And then we get this picture of Andhra Patrika Daily. This is from 1934, long after he has moved to Madras, nearly 16 years later. This is the picture we have of the Andhra Patrika thing in the thing. Later on, we get to see, he died in 1938, so, but the paper was continued and its editor was his son-in-law called Shiva Prasad. Shambhu Prasad, sorry. Shivalanka Shambhu Prasad became the editor. And this is the edition of Andhra Patrika on August 15, 1947. And the headline says, Bharata Desha Swatantriya Siddhi. Almost a Sanskritized literary headline. And it says, it's not only for Asia, but for the whole of the world. It's a great period. And in the East, a new star has risen. So when he moves to Madras, his politics changes. He becomes part of the Gandhian movement. He takes part in the salt satyagraha, and he carries the salt satyagraha in Madras itself. But at the same time, he becomes very active in Andhra Mahasabha politics. That is, all these people who are part of the freedom movement, who are part of the Indian National Congress, who are at the same time fighting that the Andhra region should be separate, that a state should be formed based on the linguistic identity. Now, this might look rather strange that at a time when you're fighting for the national independence, why is it that you're raising up this divisive issue? But you can see when you look back that they were seeing it as all part of one struggle. The cultural renaissance is a part of the national struggle. The social reform is part of the national struggle. And the identity of each region of linguistic groups is part of the national struggle. It looks like they did not see any contradiction between these many areas, and they felt that they must carry all the struggles together simultaneously. And he becomes a very strong proponent of the Andhra state, and there are many others who agree with him that the Telugu-speaking districts of the Madras presidencies must be separated and should become part of the Telugu state. But there were problems in Andhra region itself. There was a problem between the Rayalaseema region and the coastal Andhra region. And the Rayalaseema region, which is near the Madras area, is dry and poverty-stricken and drought-stricken. So the leaders under Nageswara meet in his house in Madras. His house was called Sri Bagh, and come to an agreement that when the Andhra state is formed, enough care will be taken for the development of Rayalaseema. Mind you, this is all in the 1930s, and the Andhra state is still far away on the horizon. the national independence is still in the future. The Andhra state emerged after much struggle only in 1953, when a man called Pottishiramulu fasted and died, and there were language riots in Madras, and at that time, Andhra Pradesh becomes the first linguistic state to be formed in independent India. But Nageswara was looking for an independent Telugu state much earlier. Some sort of a political visionary, you might say, who felt that real democracy and real development can only take place for a people when they govern themselves and through their own language and through their own culture. And this culture and this linguistic identity did not really negate or confront the national identity. You can see in the papers, in the articles, that they saw all of them sort of a confluence, converging together. That the separate Telugu identity is not against an Indian identity. A struggle for the Andhra state at the time of the independence struggle is part of the national independence struggle. Now, this is the most interesting aspect of his life. He dies in 1938, long before independence comes and long before Andhra state is formed. But one more thing he did. In 1924, he starts a literary magazine called Bharati. I just would like to show that to you. Bharati is a literary magazine which carries criticism, new writings. It's a monthly thing. This is called Bharati. This was launched in 1924. And in the 1924, this is the first edition. And we have the picture of Gandhi. And this is followed by a poem of 100 verses on Gandhi called Gandhi Shatakam. Now, in Telugu, as in Sanskrit, you have this tradition of writing 100 verses, and it is called Shatakam. In Sanskrit, we have this great example of Bhartrihari, who wrote this Niti Shatakam, Shringara Shatakam, and Vairagya Shatakam. And this has been followed very, very closely in Telugu by many writers, and many poets wrote there. So this tradition continued into the 20th century, and somebody has written a Gandhi Shatakam in 1924. In this, Bharati becomes a very, very prominent and eminent literary magazine, which becomes a forum for debates, for new writings of literary criticism. Now, this is the most fascinating aspect of Nageswara and of his times, that journalism for them was not divorced from culture, was not divorced from literature. And mind you, this is not just any culture or any literature. This is the literature defined in the highest terms, high literature. And they were not afraid of saying that we want to keep up the standards of literature and we want to bring in new works. And also, this is high culture even, that they want to maintain the refinement of culture. They want to show, they want to express, and they want to discuss these issues. No issue is settled. No one is going to dictate what is high culture or what is high literature. And Bharati becomes the forum for discussing all these major cultural issues. There is a lot of diversity of opinion, a lot of quarrels, and these are carried in the pages of Bharati. And that is what makes it very interesting, that this one man coming from a village in Krishna district tracks his life journey through the three presidency towns, makes his own fortune. I mean, you can call him a soldier of fortune. And at the same time, he turns to politics. He turns to politics in a very, very intense fashion. He's willing to start a paper to propagate the nationalist things, but he is not willing to confine himself to pure politics. Many of his colleagues, like Bhogaraju Pattabhisitaramaya, who you would know became a prominent Congress leader, and Gandhi put him up as a a candidate against Bose in the 1938 Congress presidential elections. And when Pattabhi Sitaramaya lost and Bose won for a second time, Gandhi said, Pattabhi's defeat is my defeat. So Pattabhi Sitaramaya was again one of the comrades of Nageswara. He wrote many a time in Bharati and in Andhra Patrika about nationalism, about national unity. So they carried this huge, wide program of politics and culture and social reform. And it comes from a man who made his own fortune. I mean, he's a self-made man. He's a self-made millionaire. I think it's a very, very inspiring story even today, because I think recently after 1980s, only the internet, the computer technology people became self-made millionaires like Narayan Murthy, Nandan Nilekani, and the Infosys crowd, middle-class millionaires. Kashinathan Nageshwara was perhaps one of the earliest examples of a middle-class millionaire with a lot of middle-class values, which I think is why his life story becomes very contemporaneous. So I would end there